Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our call. Tonight we are going to be talking about TPP, palm oil, and animal agriculture equals forest, water, and climate catastrophe. Hopefully everybody has already called in using the telephone or Skype. The number is on our screen because some of our folks are using slow internet connections. We do not ever use the video that is available in the room. It really takes up much too much bandwidth. The speakers that we are going to have tonight are special guests. Ben Lilliston from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and Ramon Vera Herrera, grain staff and editor of Biodiversidad y Cultural. Dr. Martin Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance, co-organizer of Watch the TPP, Adam Wiseman, Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, Trade Justice for New York. I am your moderator. I am Andrea Miller. I am the Executive Director of People Demanding Action. So our call norms, our audio is phone only. You must call in either via phone or Skype. Do not turn on your video camera. I know it is so tempting because we do have them, but a number of our callers, myself included, because I live in rural Virginia, are on relatively slow internet connections. All the calls are recorded. So if there is something that you missed approximately 10 minutes after the call, the link to the call recording will be posted on the internet and on our Facebook page. There will be a number of Q&A sections. We keep the call in Q&A mode to eliminate background noise, and so that also guarantees we're going to get a good, high-quality recording. When we do go into Q&A mode where we are asking you to ask questions of our speakers, we will indicate to press star 6, and then that will put you in the question queue. We also ask that you keep all discussions in the chat room on topic and professional. As I said before, the audio is phone only, and the dial-in number is 605-562-3140 with an access code of 951146. This PowerPoint that we are showing for this webinar is available. You may download it from the share button at the bottom right of this room. You may also download it by visiting peopledemandingaction.org, download/TPP Trade Justice Call 320. The PowerPoint has already been posted. There is a very large team of people who make these calls possible. Tom Hopkins is our technical advisor and our Facebook page manager. Tom is with Move On Pennsylvania. Our Facebook page is listed at the bottom of the screen. It is facebook.com/group/global TPP team. Also tonight, our chat hosts are Lisa Oldendorf from Move On New York. She's on our call planning team as well. Celeste Drake, the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist from the AFL-CIO. Linda Brewster, she's an organizer with Move On in Washington State. And we're going to have our very first speaker and member of our call planning team, Emily Ann Sladen, who's Director of Social Media for TPP Media March. Emily Ann, hopefully you're on the line.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Next slide, please. Please join us on Tuesday evening and help us raise awareness for Stop TPP for our weekly Tuesday night Twitter storm. Everyone with a Twitter account can participate. Here's the meme. If you'd like to help us promote for that, that would be wonderful. You could post this on Facebook or tweet it out on Twitter, or just create your own meme and help us bring new people to the storm on Tuesday. So you just go to the website that you see on the meme here, tiny.cc/TPP Media March, and you just copy and paste any of the tweets that you'd like to send out and participate in our storm at 9 p.m. Eastern. Also, I'm going to type my email into the chat room box, and anyone who has any type of a question about even Facebook or Twitter or how to storm or social media, please reach out to me and email me, and I will help you up your game on social media so that we can become more effective in raising awareness and stopping the TPP. Thank you so much. I'll see you on Tuesday.
And thank you very much, Emily Ann. Emily Ann is one of our TPP heroes who has been doing these Twitter storms now for 3 years. And we've got to say they must have been effective because we still do not have the TPP. It's threatening, but it hasn't passed. I've got the Meatout slide or the Meatout slide. Let's see. Who is, well, I'm going to go straight to our guest. Ben, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Oh, lovely, 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 lovely. Ben's been here before. Ben Lilliston oversees the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy's climate work. He's been working and writing about international trade issues and how they intersect with U.S. agriculture role and climate policy since 2000. Mr. Lilliston recently authored a report on how the global meat industry will benefit from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and contributed to the UN Committee on Trade and Development, Trade and Environmental Review 2013. He's been a researcher, a writer, and an editor at the Center for Study of Responsive Law, the Corporate Crime Reporter, I love that one, and the Multinational Monitor. He's a widely published writer, most recently contributing to the book Mandate for Change, and previously co-authored the book Genetically Engineered Foods, a Guide for Consumers. So, Ben, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be on this call. As the introduction said, I work at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, based in Minneapolis, but we have an office in Washington, and we've been tracking these free trade agreements for 30 years and looking closely, particularly around agriculture, and particularly within agriculture, who really wants these trade agreements and what are they trying to achieve. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the meat industry. I think if you look at the history of free trade agreements, there are different lobbies that have been really aggressive in pushing for them. There's certainly the oil and energy industry, the pharmaceutical industry, but agriculture is huge, and in particular the meat industry. So when I say the meat industry, just to give you a quick overview, we're talking about companies like Cargill, which control a lot of beef and pork in the United States and in many of the TPP countries. JBS, and it's important to think about these companies as really global companies. JBS is the biggest beef company in the U.S., and they are Brazilian-based. In pork, Smithfield is the biggest pork producer, and they are owned by a Chinese firm. In poultry, one of the biggest companies is Tyson's. Other companies are Hormel. So you probably are familiar with these names. But they, as I said, they're not just U.S. companies. They have operations all over the world, and they're in multiple TPP countries. So Cargill just opened a feed mill in Vietnam. They're invested in Australia. JBS is in Australia, U.S. and Canada. Tyson's and Smithfield are in Canada and Mexico. And so they sort of work together to try to push for certain things within TPP and other trade agreements as well. And they're also, of course, very active on the U.S. Trade Representative's Trade Advisory Committee. So we talk about how TPP was negotiated in secret and who was at the negotiating table. Well, these companies were part of the group of companies that were at the negotiating table. So what are some of the concerns that we have, and I think others in other parts of the world have, with the model of meat production that these companies push? It's important to know these are not buying from small-scale producers. They're not usually buying from sustainable sort of grazing animals. They have a particular model, and that model is confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, where they pack in as many animals as they can. If you're talking about chicken and hogs in particular, and they use feedlots to finish off beef. And this is a particular model where you could be talking about tens of thousands of animals in one small space, and they are eating primarily corn and soybeans. So a lot of if we will kind of look at the agricultural landscape in the U.S. and kind of wonder, why is there so much corn and soybean when you drive around the country? About half of that is going to these giant animal production facilities. And these companies control much of the whole production system. They have farmers, particularly in poultry and hogs, they have them almost all under contract. They actually own the animals, and the farmers or producers are in charge of raising them. The farmers and producers take on all the risk, and the companies kind of set the price as to however they want. And these type of production has done a lot of harm, in our view, to rural communities, not only in the U.S. but in other countries. You're talking about huge amounts of animal waste, which can cause a lot of water pollution and air pollution. They're often located often near communities, poor communities that don't have the political power to object to some of the conditions that they are subjected to by living near these giant facilities. There's very little genetic diversity in the animals, so they're very susceptible to disease very quickly. And so one of the things that they often do is they use a lot of antibiotics in these confined operations to try to prevent disease, even when the animals are actually healthy. And so that has caused a lot of issues around the growth of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So there are health aspects to this as well. I look at some of the climate issues, particularly around these huge manure lagoons, as well as these giant cattle feedlots. These are high-emitting ways to produce animals. The other aspects of this model of production is really exploiting labor. The processing that goes on when you move this many animals in very giant sort of meat processing facilities. This is very dangerous work. It often relies on immigrant labor, whether it's Latino or in some cases African immigrant labor. And the last thing I would say about that, just to give you the background, is that in the U.S., meat consumption is actually flattening out, and in some cases declining for some types of meat. But where a lot of the production is starting to go more and more is for exports, and our exports are rising in meat production. So these free trade agreements are very important to these companies. They want to be able to continue to export. That's really their vehicle for growth. And you can see that it's most evident in you may have heard recently that the World Trade Organization struck down the country of origin labeling in the U.S. of meat. And one of the reasons that the meat companies really wanted that struck down is because it shows where the animal was born, raised, and slaughtered. And in many cases, that may be 3 different countries. And so they don't want consumers to really kind of understand that. So they really fought tooth and nail to beat down country of origin labeling. They did that in the U.S. And then ultimately the World Trade Organization struck that down. So very quickly, what do they want in the TPP? What are they trying to achieve? One of the main things is tariffs. And tariffs, as you know, are kind of taxes at the border for exports. And so they're looking at Japan, Vietnam, and Malaysia, the 3 countries where we don't already have free trade agreements. In particular, they're targeting Japan because Japan has very high tariffs on meat. They're trying to protect their own producers. And so both, particularly beef and pork, have placed a real premium in striking down Japanese tariffs. And they've had some success in doing that, although Japan is sort of resisting and will be doing probably a lot of subsidies to support their producers. So it'll be interesting to see what the impact of TPP is on Japan. The other thing they want is a uniform system of food safety regulations. So that means, you know, when they're moving animals across borders or certainly trading in meat, they want the same system in each country, so they don't have to worry about one country having either stronger standards, usually stronger standards than the other, and where they actually produced it. And this is a big issue around what kind of what you can put in the animal feed, whether it's antibiotics or things like ractopamine or other animal drugs. It can have to do with issues around the levels of bacteria that are acceptable when you're trading for food safety purposes. So that's a big goal of theirs, and they have achieved that in TPP through the SPS agreement. And then they wanted greater regulatory cooperation within the companies, or within the countries. So there is a regulatory cooperation chapter in TPP with the kind of goal that countries talk together and sort of sort out differences and regulations. And so that could be any kind of regulation, but that's something that they're interested in. GMO feed, they're very hints or dependent on genetically engineered corn and soybeans for the animal feed. And so they want strong intellectual property rules in TPP to help promote the expansion of GMOs in other countries. Not just, we're already all in the U.S., but they also want it in other countries so they don't have to worry about problems with feed. That has been one of the big issues around GMOs when you export it or move it to another country, whether that country has also approved GMOs. And then you have all these different variants of different types of genetically engineered food. So they want one system, very little problems with moving GMOs or trading GMOs so that they can have access to feed. And finally, the investor state provisions, which I'm sure you guys have all heard a lot about, that's important for the meat companies as well. They want to be able to, if they need to challenge rules that they think are unjust, they want to be able to have that right to do that. And Cargill is one of the few agribusiness companies that's already used investor state. They've challenged Mexico and won in a case around high fructose corn syrup and the ability to export from the U.S. into Mexico. And they won a fairly significant case with Mexico on that. So there is some precedent in these companies using that tool. I mean, I think we can expect it a lot more under the TPP. So pretty much every segment of the meat industry has endorsed TPP. The dairy industry, the pork, the beef, the poultry, they're all on board. They're all highly supportive. And I think from our perspective, this is troubling because it really just sort of locks in this industrial model of meat production that we feel like has not worked well for farmers and producers, where they've become sort of just employees of the companies rather than having their own autonomy. It hasn't worked well for the environment when you look at water pollution and air pollution. Hasn't worked well for public health when you look at issues around antibiotic resistant bacteria, as well as other food safety sort of spreading through these confined animal operations very quickly. And it hasn't worked well for animal welfare. I mean, when you're packing this many animals in a small space, there's been a lot of concerns about the quality of life that those animals have been able to live during their brief period of time through the production process. So I think I'll end there, and I look forward to questions. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very, very much, Ben. We're going to go to our next guest, Ramon, Vera, Herrera, and we are going to have a combined Q&A with both of our special guests. Ramon is one of the grain staff. He's the overall editor of Biodiversidad, Sustainable Culturas, a magazine published by Grain and 8 other organizations and movements throughout Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Ramon, thank you so very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be with all of you, and I appreciate very much this opportunity to speak a little bit about these issues. So, well, I can begin saying that, of course, we are really deeply concerned, and our experience in Mexico, at least with the FTAs, has been really very long. We are one of the nations that have more free trade agreements or bilateral free trade agreements signed with many countries in the world. So we know that these treaties have enormous effects on agriculture, food, health, job conditions, and climate, but most importantly on justice. We need to defend ourselves against all the unjust and illegitimate laws, regulations, norms, or standards that are promoted by these FTAs, because they deeply affect our livelihoods and open room to move for corporations so they can devastate, land grab, privatize, and submit persons to precarious conditions, making them prone to accept whatever situation suits to corporate power. So we understand FTAs as a tool for submitting justice to the economic powers, no? Mexico was the first country to suffer the global economic policies imposed by the international finance system, put in place since the end of the 80s. And it's curious because all the subsequent free trade agreements are ways of putting chains and padlocks so these rules stay in place and progress into regulations more in favor of the enterprises and less receptive to the population demands. No? We had a process in Mexico recently, the People's Permanent Tribunal, that sessioned in Mexico from 2011 to 2015. And in their final sentence, they acknowledged that the negotiations for the NAFTA process, since the negotiations for the NAFTA process, the Mexican government has intervened to facilitate the transformation and compulsory elimination of sectors of the economy like people considered redundant or unnecessary as peasants, for example, and in the cities many different jobs. No? This was, of course, done by economic means, ranging from dispossession or by separating them from their means of production or by distortioning their subsistence economy. I'm quoting directly from the sentence. No, this means that the profitability of the mere or the mere sustainability of peasant agriculture was attacked by adopting the policies imposed by the IMF and the WTO, which included the privatization and patenting of seeds, the substitution of native seeds in favor of hybrid seeds linked to technological packages with agrochemicals and mechanization. And this all made the agricultural activity really unprofitable until people began to run for their life and exile to the U.S. or the major cities or labor fields in the north of Mexico. No? One of the main tools of these FTAs was to build comparative advantages by dropping the regulations needed to protect the environment and dropping the necessary protections for jobs. In the case of agriculture, the state began to enact laws, regulations, and a wide array of public policies that undermine and even prohibit or criminalize that people responded in their particular ways or with their particular strategies to solve the problems and needs that are of the utmost importance to them. This process is a kind of disablement, and it is crucial to all the free trade agreements in the world to work. And let's see how. The main point promoted by the Mexican state was dismantling our juridical or judicial structure and system, the legal system of Mexico. No? The first step was to begin a deep reform of the Mexican Constitution and of hundreds of laws and regulations related to the backbone of this juridical system. No? This process entailed the production of laws and regulations, standards, norms, and public policies that, in fact, stopped people from achieving justice through the legal channel, while opening room to move for the corporations to profit from the situation and pursue their interests with all the force of the law behind them. Even promoting a parallel system of norms and regulations that have curtailed the sharpness of the judicial system to protect the nation's sovereignty in favor of corporation goals. No? So it is terrible that suddenly people are not defended by our system, our legal system, but this legal system acts in favor of the corporations very strongly, so strongly that in the process of the People's Permanent Tribunal that we had in Mexico recently, the People's Permanent Tribunal called this a very strange term called deviation of power. This, of course, was a controversial term, and at some point people said, no, this is abuse of power. And People's Permanent Tribunal insisted that because of the systematic and structural way in which a state, with all its architecture and powers, behaved through the years against its own population and in favor of the corporations that interact with it, we can call of a deviation of power, or detour of power. No? This means, of course, that a wide array of economic factors impose themselves as the superlative power above law and integral human, individual, and collective rights. This represents a condition where economy submits or subjugates rights and the law that might protect them. No? According to the People's Permanent Tribunal, NAFTA collides with Article 53 of the Vienna Convention that states that any treaty that affects the imperative or international law must be nullified. But of course, the NAFTA and all the free trade agreements that are in the pipeline now, of course, they collide with most of the international laws that try to protect human rights and environment rights or collective rights against all these economic interests. No? One of these mechanisms, and that we are going to suffer from the TPP and many other of the free trade agreements in the pipelines, is what we call ISDS, no? And they began with the North American Free Trade Agreement that comprised Canada, Mexico, and United States, and immediately they included investor-state dispute settlements, or ISDS. 4% of all ISDS brought to the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, and the World Bank concern agriculture, fishing, and forestry as of the end of 2014. And, well, I must say that one of the first, or perhaps the first dispute was Meatout, a U.S. corporation against Mexico. In 2000, they granted $16.2 million awarded to Meatout because they wanted to put a waste management facility, and of course this was a precedent for all the other disputes that are there. There are many, no? Bill Lilliston talked about Corn Products International against Mexico in 2009. 58.4 million were awarded, no, because of the high fructose corn syrup, no. And these kind of disputes are going to be more in the way of really having the people making justice, because all of these disputes stemmed from the fact that people began resistance, and of course sometimes the governments start a litigation against the corporations, and the corporations can really sideline the judicial system and suddenly go win the cases. There are many different. I invite you to look for the new grains platform called isdsbilaterals.org. That is a kind of tool for the people that resist to understand what's at stake in these all ISDS, because there are many different cases, and we must learn from them to try to defend ourselves of these mechanisms, no? Of course, also NAFTA has worked in a way of dismantling the food system of Mexico and eventually of many other countries through the promotion of an international food system that works in favor of processed foods. This is very important for us at GRAIN, because we have been tracking down the international agro-industrial food system, and we understand that this is one of the big enemies, because they, of course, go in the way of climate and, of course, agriculture and, of course, food conditions for everyone, no? Over the past 2 decades, the Mexican government has signed more than a dozen free trade agreements and nearly 30 investment treaties, which have opened up the countryside and the retail sector to transnational companies, putting Mexico's food system up for grabs. The North American Free Trade Agreement, signed in 1994, triggered an immediate surge of direct investment from the U.S. into Mexico's food processing industry, and between 1999 and 2004, 3/4 of the country's foreign investment went into the production of processed foods. At the same time, sales of processed foods went up by 5% to 10% each year. And now Mexico is one of the 10 biggest producers of processed food in the world, with total sales reaching $124 billion in 2012. Of course, it's not Mexico as a nation, but of the corporations involved, including PepsiCo, Nestlé, Unilever, and Danone, and which made $28 billion in profits from these sales in 2012, $9 billion more than they made in Brazil. that is considered Latin America's largest economy. No? Mexico offers, of course, and that is the rub with all these free trade agreements. The food processing industry received from Mexico not only low costs, a saving of 14% compared to the U.S., but a network of free trade agreements that permit access to big markets such as the European Union and the U.S. with tariff preferences. No? Even with the global economic crisis, the sales of the retail business establishments have grown steadily in the last 3 years. These corporations are investing heavily and taking over local distribution. And that is really very important. We understand now that the local distribution is a key target for all these corporations. And of course, they won't do with supermarkets, but they are looking forward to replace the corner shops so they can achieve a kind of control of the absolute domination of the sales point. That is, they will control availability of the many different products because they want to impose to the public processed foods, but only the variety they want to impose. No? So at some point they have really becoming really very omnipresent. It's funny, one of the stores that is a retail chain that has displaced tiendas or corner shops in Mexico is a subsidiary of Coca-Cola, no? And they open a store, an average of 3 stores a day. That means 1 store each 8 hours, and they are opening their 14th store in this year, 2015. No, so now the vision of these corporations is that they want to change the way the people produce food, to convert everything into agri-industrial food production of raw materials, to really impose to us all the food processed products, and that will have an enormous effect on everything, not only on climate, but also on health. No, we as grain are really very concerned by how free trade agreements promote this agro-industrial food system, and there's a huge chain that links land grabbing with land deforestation, hybrid or laboratory seeds, agrochemicals, people's eviction from their territories, the savage growth of cities, the rise of processed food empires, and the substitution of food growing in favor of the agri-industrial cultivation of raw materials. And of course, this will have huge impacts on the climate crisis we are suffering right now. And from deforestation to fertilizer use, and from factory farms to supermarket shelves, producing, transporting, consuming, and wasting food accounts for around half of all the greenhouse gas emissions, and this will rise. No? Since creating new channels for the flow of farmed food and changing regulatory and investment regimes for agribusiness and the food industry to be high priorities. No? These current deals are really into agri-industrial food systems, and Grain has identified seven ways that will make this climate crisis worse, and I will only mention them, and with that I will end my participation. The first is increasing production, trade, and consumption of foods that are big emitters of greenhouse gases, of course, will be terrible. No? Promoting industrial farming for export over local farms and food systems that are local and that are sustainable. Boosting global supermarkets and highly processed foods, this climate cheating of, outsourcing of emissions and all the red mechanisms and all that. Of course, more biofuels, undermining of local food economies and food sovereignty, and making many measures of food security and food safety illegal because of competition with big corporations. No? So we are really concerned and worried about these deals, and I again thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to you and to say my word. No, thank you very much.
Ramon, thank you very much, and hopefully you'll be able to stay with us a little while while we have question and answer.
Yes.
So, wonderful. If you have a question for Ben or Ramon, press *6. And I already have my first question. Caller at area code 760. Go ahead. Your line is open. Give us your name, where you're calling from, and then let us know if the question is for Ben or Ramon.
Okay, my name is Tony O'Doherty. I'm calling from Southern California, and this question is really for both Ben and Ramon. I'm asking, would it be true to say that the promoters of the TPP and other trade deals regard the existence of nation-states, sovereign nation-states, as an obstacle to their global trading objectives, and that their real objective is to transfer power from those governments and give it to the corporations and their international tribunals? Thanks.
Ben, do you want to answer?
Sure. I think that that's accurate. I think that they don't really, some of these companies are larger than some of the countries in the world. Particularly if you look at a company like Walmart, which is a huge player in the global food system. So they really do look at countries as individual country regulations and rules and efforts to support their own farmers and their own food system as impediments for what they're really trying to do, which is, they want to control natural resources. They want to control agricultural resources, but not just agriculture, whether it's mining or forestry or fisheries. They want to control natural resources and from wherever they can get it and distribute it in the way that benefits them the most. So I think that's accurate.
Yes, I believe also, answering the question, I believe also that, of course, we are in the situation of a kind of commercial and corporate power that tries to impose their way above the sovereignty of states and the sovereignty of many populations in the world. And that's terrible, because we are looking at a panorama where economic powers are subjugating rights, subjugating the law systems. All these provisions of the free trade agreements are ways of circumventing or bypassing all these regulations, and that's really very worrying, because then law and human rights and environment rights will suffer most from these provisions.
Our next question is from Susie Chestnut. Go ahead, Susie.
Hi, I'm in St. Louis, and I wanted to thank both of the speakers for doing such an excellent job. And I wondered if they could elaborate more about the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions from corporate agriculture.
Sure. I'll talk briefly about that, and maybe Ramon can also weigh in on it. So in agriculture, the main emissions come from many different segments. One of the things when they calculate emissions from agriculture globally, what they're often looking at also is land use changes that accompany that. So in different parts of the world, they're cutting down forests in order to expand agriculture. So that in and of itself is increasing emissions and decreasing our ability to absorb CO2. So that's one segment of it. In the U.S., you're looking at the heavy fertilizer use, synthetic fertilizers. So a lot of the corn and soybean that you see out there, fertilizers are high NO2 emitters. And then animal production, particularly beef, but also, as I mentioned, in these kind of confined operations where you have these giant manure lagoons and pork production. These are large methane emitters, and so we feel like we should be treating some of these CAFOs, these confined sort of factory farms, as industrial emitters, and they should probably be regulated just like you regulate a energy utility.
Yes. Of course, this system is really terrible in terms of the contribution they make to greenhouse emissions. No, we calculate that in grain that between 44% and 57% of all the emissions of green gases comes from this industrial food system. If we consider the whole chain, from deforestation and land grabbing to what we can say is the spoil of after the consumption of food. For example, deforestation in itself, it will be between 15% and 18%. All the agricultural processes with all the agrochemicals and all the taking the carbon of the ground and taking it into the atmosphere, it's around 11 or 15% in itself. But we have to consider also transportation, that's another 5 or 6%, processing and packing, another 8-10%. And of course, refrigeration and even selling, it's another 2-4%. And finally, all the spoils and waste, it will be 3-4%, and that will amount totally to something like 44-57%. So it's terrible because if we consider all together, then we look at all the chain and we understand that all the metabolism of the food system is becoming really something that is becoming really very terrible for everyone.
All right, next caller. You're showing up on my board as Martin Drew, area code 561.
Yes, this is Drew Martin. I have a question about, I'm from Palm Beach, Florida. I have a question about the recent assassinations in Honduras. And I don't know how this relates. And do you think that these trade agreements will lead to greater assassinations and repression of indigenous peoples?
I do think so, because many people are defending themselves collectively because the territories are at stake, and the grabbing of territories is not only to have extraction of mining or whatever, but it's a lot of different ways of profiting from these territories, and we believe that people are going to defend themselves because, of course, the situation is really terrible. Honduras has become one of the really the nations of what the experts called the triangle of genocide between Mexico and Colombia and all Central America, where the corporations are really trying to get into the territories of the the peoples, of the indigenous peoples, but also of peasants' territories and properties and land, no? So now they are becoming really very violent, no?
Next caller, you're showing up as Mark Schaffner.
Schaefer.
Schaefer, very sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, I was briefly disconnected, but I'm back. This is, I think, mostly for Ben. Talked about antibiotic resistance, but this is a particularly major issue in my opinion. There was a report a few months ago, I think November, that in China they had found totally antibiotic-resistant bacteria in the human food chain. And if I remember correctly, 25,000 people already were found positive. And that was right before, I think it was December, the Congress capitulated to the WTO case and repealed the country of origin food labeling. That's a particularly incongruous conjunction of events. Is there any recourse?
Around the country of origin labeling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also just around Chinese food that may be, I think it was chicken, if I remember correctly, which may be contaminated with totally antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This was reported in a major medical journal and reported by the BBC.
Yeah.
So either label it or ban it.
Yes. Well, this issue of importing meat from China to the U.S. is kind of new. Because usually most of it's been the other way around. But I believe that the FDA just approved the ability to. So here's how crazy the meat industry is, and particularly in chicken. They would raise the chicken here, so it'd be U.S. chicken, and send it over to China to process it, and then bring it back here. Because apparently the labor costs are so cheap in China that somehow made economic sense. And then so they most recently just approved the ability to raise the chicken there in China and process it and then ship it here. So we may be seeing more Chinese chicken coming in. It doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to regulate that, and I think that there are members of Congress who are raising a lot of concerns about that, and we have to continue to raise concerns to make sure that our food safety system is strong and stronger than it needs to be, so a lot stronger than it is right now. So this is a kind of an issue that's in flux, I would say, and we'll have to see exactly where it goes. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria and the contribution from animal production is a global issue. It's a very serious issue. Somewhere around 80% of antibiotics in the U.S. are used in animal production. Every public health organization pretty much in the United States has come out and said this is an issue, and now it's turning into a global issue. The World Health Organization is looking into it and trying to develop a sort of a global policy. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes and how that collides with this confined animal feeding, the factory farm model. And a lot of these companies are claiming to be able to raise animals without antibiotics. You'll see the antibiotic-free label in grocery stores a lot more than you used to, but it's not been verified. A lot of those are not third-party verified. So it'll be, and we're not exactly sure how that's going to play out going forward. But I think the industry recognizes that this is an issue that they have to deal with, both from just a consumer standpoint, but also from a public health standpoint.
Caller, our next caller, you are showing up at area code 815. Your line's open.
Yes, that's Lorna. I'm in LA. I had a question from Ramon. He had so much information, and I just wondered if he had some papers he's written or anything that we could go to and read some of this information. That's it. Thank you. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Thanks, Lorna.
Yes, I sent the organizers a series of documents and the links to access them. So I don't know how are they going to put them into disposition, but I think they will.
All right. Next caller. You're showing up as anonymous, so you may be on Skype.
Stephen Costes of New York City here.
Hey, Stephen.
I have a question to ask both of them. What's their stance on cultured beef?
Oh, cultured feed?
Yes.
I'm not. I don't think we have a stance at IATP on that. I don't think we have studied that close enough. But the industry is definitely trying a lot of different things to try to get out of and reduce the antibiotic use, and that's one of them for sure.
All right, Paul, your line's open.
Paul, hi. This is a question for Ben. Very recently, the vote was taken for what was called the Dark Act, and they did not get enough votes to pass. Consequently, as I understand it, now states can have their own GMO labeling state by state. If that's the case, how might the TPP prohibit that?
How will TPP affect GMO labeling at the state level?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not going to. Okay, so this is a good question. So the Dark Act was a way for them to deal with GMO labeling at the national level because they're concerned that a number of states are passing their own GMO labeling, and Vermont is the big one, and that will go into effect on July 1st. So there's a little bit of a panic in the food industry and the biotech industry about the kind of disruption that this is going to cause. So they want to pass national legislation to kind of override states' ability to do that. And they weren't able to move it forward in the Senate. We believe, and I think most people are watching it really closely, they're going to take another shot at it. They're going to try to revise that bill and get more votes on it. GMO labeling at the national level, if there was a mandatory GMO labeling, I believe that would be allowed under our trade rules and under TPP. Something like 64 countries have GMO labeling right now. It's one of those things where I think that would probably stand at the state level. That's another question because it's basically what these trade deals don't like is when what they call sub-federal, so states or local governments set up their own rules, and particularly if they make them stronger than they are at the federal level. So there's a number of state regulations, like some states have stronger regulations around chemicals than other states. Some states have different food safety regulations than others do. Those are the kind of things that could potentially be challenged and potentially under kind of an investor state type of challenge. So in TPP, most of the biotech companies are not in other TPP countries outside of the United States. But if you look at TTIP, which they're also negotiating, the U.S. and European trade agreement, of course, Syngenta is one of the world's largest biochemical and biotech companies. and it's conceivable that they could take a shot at some of those state-level GMO labeling efforts under TTIP. So this is one of those things that is in motion, is fluid, and we'll have to see where it goes. And I think the Dark Act is we still don't know what they're going to come back with, because I have to believe they're going to try again before July 1st and Vermont's bill goes into effect.
This is Andrea. I was on Capitol Hill, and yes, there is going to be another attempt at the Dark Act, and we may even see it later this month.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be our last question because we do have more speakers. Area code 503. Your line's open.
Hi, this is Dan. I guess my only question is vegan enough? Is it helpful going vegan? I know that tofu has soy in it, and it's a big deal with the GMO soy and tofu. How do we know if we're doing enough, like in our own personal lives daily, like eating right? What are your tips?
Well, I'll try to answer that quick, and maybe Ramon has some thoughts on that as well. I think I'm generally uncomfortable, recommending what people should do or not. I think that's kind of a personal decision, but I think some of the strongest things you can do is to kind of know where your food's coming from, regardless of whether you're eating meat or eating vegetables or going vegan. To know your farmers to the extent that you can, if you know to buy locally to the extent that you can, to not buy processed food as much as you can. I think those are kind of the general principles, so that you basically the system that they've set up is one that is sort of unaccountable. It's anonymous. The food is anonymous. You go through the grocery store, it could be from anywhere. And particularly in processed food, and there's no accountability, something, whether it's a food safety issue, but also just health in general issue. And they've created this distance between consumers and food. And so I think that, that's one of the strongest, I think, acts of resistance, is to really try to connect with your food in a more direct way, where it's produced, and who's doing it. So that would be some of my thoughts.
I agree really very strongly with Ben. Of course, the difficulty of telling someone to assume a way of life is really very difficult. But of course, you can go looking forward for the process involved in the production of a particular food, and of course the idea of reacquiring or recovering the way in which when we produced our own food, or our neighbors produced something and we produced something else, and we traded because we knew each other, and it was more into a kind of familiar thing. I think it's really more important to know where your food comes from, and of course not consuming processed food than being vegan or meat eater or whatever. No, I think the point is where this food is coming from. No, is the question to ask. No.
Well, thank you very, very much, Ben and Ramon.
Andrew, before we close, I was trying to get a question in, but I'm on the speaker line, so I couldn't raise my hand. Would it be okay to ask one more question?
If you're prepared to limit your remarks, yes.
Okay, I can try to do that. So my question was, I was wondering, Ramon, you mentioned, and maybe if either or both of you can comment on this. Ramon, if you mentioned biofuels, I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit and talk about what TPP's implications are for the palm oil industry and what that could potentially mean for the planet.
Well, I think there are provisions for going forward with palm oil. No, all over the world, it's a trend that it's not going to stop so easily, and we must really be prepared to fight against palm oil or the palm industry, because it is linked with violence, and the way that they have been imposing palm as a way of producing fuel and other stuff. No, it's becoming really very terrible all over the world, in Africa, in Indonesia, and also in Latin America. No, someone asked us before about the violence in Honduras and the assassination of Berta Cáceres and many others that have been killing them in the recent years, and some of them are linked to resisting the palm oil, at least the industrial palm oil in monoculture. No, so it's terrible that, of course, all these free trade agreements that are in place or that are in the pipeline to become in place are really promoting palm oil monocultures and many other monocultures. No?
All right. And again, Ben and Ramon, thank you so very much for joining us. Our next speaker is our own Adam Weitzman. He's with Global Justice for Animals and the Environment. He's part of our call planning team. Adam recruits a lot of our speakers, and he's now going to walk us through some events, some news stories, and there may be some actions. So, Adam, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So there's going to be a couple links that I'll be referring back to repeatedly during the presentation. So I just want to highlight those at the beginning. This webinar is one of many events that take place in the fight to oppose TPP and other unfair trade deals. You can find out about these webinars and other events by going to tradejustice.net and then clicking on the upcoming events link, or just going to tradejustice.net/events. We also put out a weekly update, or usually weekly update, of news stories. There are lots of stories that come out every week about these trade agreements, and it's really there's a lot to know that's happening. So to find out about the latest news stories, you can go to tradejustice.net/news, or just click the news link on the left side of the website. And so every week on this call, or I guess every 2 weeks, we review some of the top stories. And this week, because of the topic of the call, I'm going to be focusing on some stories that relate to the environment, agriculture, and related issues. So from the top, there's a newish piece in Byline that's pretty extensive, that deals pretty extensively in how TPP threatens the environment. All the links, by the way, that you see on this webinar, if you go to the tradejustice.net/news link that I mentioned, you'll see a link there that says 320 report, and all these links are live links there. Also, ironically, the head of the WTO was just recently advising that hydrocarbon-based economies must diversify, which flies in the face of the WTO just recently ruling against India's domestic solar program, which was trying to create an economic base for solar. The WTO is, of course, the World Trade Organization. And so really speaking out of both sides of its mouth there, its own rules work against the very goal that it's saying is necessary. The Sierra Club has a new report about the failure of the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement. The U.S.-Peru FTA notably built in 7 multilateral environmental agreements. It had a special annex on forestry. This was supposed to be the model of a more environmentally sustainable trade agreement. Many of us in the environmental community argue that, in fact, this agreement fell short in terms of its environmental considerations, but unfortunately, this was held up as a model for a new for what trade agreements could and should look like by the U.S. Trade Representative and some members of Congress. Well, years now that this trade agreement has been in effect for years, exactly what we warned about has happened. The environmental conditions, the environmental language in this agreement has largely gone unenforced. Our own government, who has a responsibility to push for enforcement under the rules of the agreement, has really done nothing, and the Peruvian government, for its own part, has allowed the illegal logging trade to continue. So this raises, again, the question of, in the context of TPP, which has even less enforceable environmental rules than Peru FTA, if Peru FTA, which was a stronger agreement in terms of the environment, has failed so miserably, how can we possibly trust these even weaker environmental rules in TPP? We heard from Ben about country of origin labeling and how country of origin labeling for meat has really disappeared as a result of the World Trade Organization. The USDA just issued a final rule lifting the very last vestiges of this consumer information program as of just recently. About 40 environmental groups just sent a letter to Congress urging Congress to reject the TPP, and this comes along with a report that was just recently issued by a bunch of groups, including the Sierra Club, looking at the Keystone XL pipeline case that we talked about recently, where the TransCanada Corporation is suing the U.S. under NAFTA for claiming that its investor rights are being infringed upon by the U.S.'s refusing to approve the environmentally devastating Keystone XL pipeline. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to some of the actions that we can take, because there are concrete steps that we can take to defeat the TPP, and the concrete steps that we can take in the next month, in fact. There are concrete steps we can take within the next month. Congress is going on recess from March 24th until April 11th. This is a long recess, and this is a great time for us to meet with our members of Congress, to tell them about some of the issues that we've heard about here, and to tell them about some of the other issues that should raise their concerns about this trade deal. Also, Friday, April 22nd will be Earth Day. So just to review quickly some of the arguments that we can use. Moving on to the next slide. Many of us probably have heard that TPP has become a major issue in this election. Now, there's an argument coming out of Forbes magazine and other people saying that John Kasich's and Hillary Clinton's win in Ohio proves that people don't care about trade agreements like TPP, because John Kasich supports TPP and Hillary Clinton has been, to say the least, wishy-washy on the issue. But what other reports are arguing, and what the Forbes report misses, is that Hillary Clinton, after her devastating loss in Michigan, in the days following and leading up to the Ohio primary, significantly ramped up her anti-TPP rhetoric, because she realized that TPP is an issue that Ohioans care about, and TPP is an issue that could decide this election. And that's something that our members of Congress going into an election year need to consider. As for John Kasich, who is, of course, an Ohio favorite son, winning an election in his own state, we shouldn't make too much of that, considering that Ohio legislators have faced so much pressure that Rob Portman, the former U.S. Trade Representative, the guy who used to be Michael Froman, has come out against TPP under pressure from people like us. Next slide. And of course, the issue that is really driving the debate around TPP in the elections is jobs, jobs, jobs. Last week, or last webinar, we talked a little bit about TPP and the issues around currency manipulation, trade, and jobs in the context of a new report by the Economic Policy Institute. And this report documented how the U.S. trade deficit with TPP country cost 2 million jobs in 2015, and TPP's failure to address the issue of currency manipulation guaranteed that under TPP this problem would continue and in fact be exacerbated. Now that report has been joined by a new report by Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, which has said that last year the U.S. trade deficit jumped 418% with countries that we have free trade agreements with, but actually declined 6% with countries that we don't have free trade agreements with. So the message is clear. Free trade agreements do not promote a balance of trade in favor of U.S. exports. They do just the opposite. Next slide. Now, the two speakers that we heard from tonight, both of their organizations have produced a number of reports. Two of them of relevance to our call are Big Meat Swallows, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Trade Deals Boosting Climate Change, the Food Factor. Going into the month of Earth Day, these are issues we should present to our elected officials. Ramon, as Ramon mentioned, that his organization has also put out a number of other reports that he shared with me, and I will post those in the chat box and send those to people in a follow-up email to the call. Next slide. There are also a number of other important environmental analyses that have come out about TPP of late. One from Professor Christopher Wald. Another is the one that I mentioned that the Sierra Club and other groups sponsored about TransCanada's $15 billion suit. Also another document that we should be sharing, and these are all documents we can share with our elected officials. Another document is a letter that I mentioned from various environmental groups. And again, if you go to tradejustice.net/news and look at the 320 report, all these documents are linked there. Next slide. Okay, so Earth Day is coming up, and Earth Day is a critical outreach opportunity to get the word out about these terrible trade deals and what they can mean for our planet. Some things that we can do: we can organize a film screening, or screen this webinar. This webinar will be going to YouTube. You can go to it and find it at tradejustice.net/webinarvids. Encourage local environmental groups to co-sponsor an event where you show these films, invite an environmental speaker on TPP, either someone live or one of our speakers or another environmental expert via Skype. And that's something, if you send me a message in the chat box, we can send you additional information about how to find speakers. You can set up an information booth at an Earth Day fair or leaflet at Earth Day events. And in another slide, I'll be telling you about how to find some publications to share. You can protest at the office of your member of Congress on Earth Day if they have yet to take a position against the TPP. Next slide. Okay, so a few videos that you can show in your screening. Again, these will be in the report that I shared with you. There are videos on TPP and the environment from Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, from Friends of the Earth, from the Sierra Club. There's a great lecture by a staffer at Public Services International. Also of particular interest, the House Ways and Means Committee just recently held a hearing, the Democrats in Ways and Means, on TPP's environmental impacts with some great testimony from staffers at the Sierra Club and the Environmental Investigation Agency. It's really worth watching. I recommend it highly. Next slide. So these are the kind of things you can show if you organize a TPP film event. My organization, Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, has put out a number of flyers, handouts, form letters that you can get people to sign, collect some signatures of letters to deliver to your elected officials. If you go to gjae.net/TPPlit, you can find some of our current publications as well as a link to more TPP information. Next slide. Okay, and some links to where you can find more information about TPP and the environment. The Sierra Club has a great TPP page. Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, Friends of the Earth, all have TPP pages. The Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy has a page of trade resources, and you can also find trade resources at the grain site. Again, all these resources are in the report, the 320 report. So go to tradejustice.net/320news. And thanks, everyone. Next slide. I think that's it for me.
That's it for you. Thanks, Adam. Our next speaker is another member of our planning team. It's Mara Cohen. Mara works with me at End Mass Criminalization. She helps us get speakers for Agitator Radio, and Mara is going to talk to us about our brand new Organizers Resource Hub. Take it away, Mara.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Adam, for presenting that activist aspect of our struggle with the TPP. And I just wanted to introduce the Resource Hub, the Organizers Resource Hub, where we're here to help people organize actions and get their communities organized so that there's a culture of resistance and not of capitulation to these free trade agreements, which comes from a feeling of helplessness and weakness against these things. At the Organizing Resource Hub, we want to be a one-stop shop for organizing your rally or event, even if that's just standing on the corner at the bus stop flyering. We want to give personal mentoring on all aspects of the effort, whether that's recruitment, preparing flyers, contacting the media, creating PowerPoints, or whatever level of help you need, however much, through the whole process. It would be in person, through email, or virtual trainings or conference calls, whatever people are feeling like they need. We want to be a resource so that you can go out and organize for the actions that we need to do to make communities aware, active, and ready to act. Next slide, please. As we help people develop materials or develop media or whatever it is that we're helping them with, they in turn become sort of experts in that area or have other areas of endeavor that they're very good at. So we want to have people come back and share their expertise in those areas or other areas with other people who need help. So feel free to be somebody who needs help and then to be somebody who can help. We already have somebody helping with media, helping with researching and writing flyers, PowerPoints, and we're getting more people all the time. So if you feel you have anything that you have learned over your organizing career or as a researcher, anything that you can give us, please contact me, and we can go back to the first slide with my bio, back to. And my email address is there on the screen, maraj51@gmail.com. And please contact me. It would be great if you could plan a March week of action during the congressional recess. That's the 24th through the 3rd of April. And you could use that as a way of organizing for a Earth Day action. These things build on each other, and we could talk amongst each other between the recess and Earth Day. So we could set up a conference call if people were wanting to do that. So anything you can give, get, or lend to the Resource Center would be a tremendous thing, and I wish you all good luck on your endeavors, and we shall flush the TPP. Thank you.
Thanks, Mara. Now I want to bring up a friend of this call. Probably all of our regulars know Dr. Margaret Flowers. She is the co-director of popularresistance.org, and it's our economy. She's the co-organizer of Flush the TPP, and we have seen some phenomenal actions that Flush the TPP has started and organized throughout the country. So welcome, Margaret.
Thank you for inviting me, Andrea, and thank you to everybody on the call. So I wanted to follow up on what Mara said as we continue to build this culture of resistance this year to make sure that the TPP implementing legislation does not get introduced in Congress this year. And the President's office continues to say that they're hopeful that they will introduce it. Of course, we've heard language from them like this before when they kept saying that they would get fast-tracked by a certain date and then that date would pass, and it wasn't passed. So we know that they're hopeful, but we are in a strong position, and we need to keep building on that and keep it that way. And that's thanks to the work of everybody on this call that we have made it this far. So thinking past the March recess in April, and I know people are doing some April Fool's actions around the beginning of April, I wanted to talk about looking into what we need to be thinking about in May. And in May, the U.S. International Trade Commission is going to be putting out a report probably around mid-May on the economic impacts of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And one thing that the President's office has said is that they are confident they think they can get the votes because they're going to pick out pieces of the TPP for individual congressional districts and try to sell members of Congress on purported benefits that it might have in their congressional district. And we can expect that the report coming out in mid-May is going to be favorable to the TPP. The people that are on that commission are similar to the people that we see in the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and so we need to be ready to tell the truth and give the counter argument to our members of Congress. So we do have some studies that can help us with that, and if you go to flushthetpp.org to the Tools for Education page, we have links to various economic studies there from Tufts and other institutes. The Economic Policy Institute just put out a study showing the impact of the Trans-Pacific, sorry. Give me 1 second. Sorry, it's been a long day. It does a state-by-state, like, okay, how many jobs were lost in 2015 from trade deficit with countries that are in the TPP, the ones that we already have trade agreements with. And so it goes state by state and shows the 2015 job losses. And we can argue that if the TPP passed, then those job losses would be even greater. And then if you look at the Tufts study, it talks about the overall impacts on wealth inequality. So these are arguments that we need to be preparing now to make publicly and to our members of Congress. And so on our Wednesday night organizing calls, we've been talking about kind of doing a TPP truth campaign in May, which people might want to get involved with that. It could be done through social media or through going to your members of Congress's office or doing visibility or resistance actions. And then another area that you could focus on in May is just the impacts on jobs because of it being May Day, beginning of the month, or the impacts that it does to economies in other countries, and organize actions around that. So just wanted to throw that out there and put that on our radar for organizing towards May. If we can get past May and though no legislation has been introduced, then I think we'll be in a good position, but then we need to start thinking about organizing in the fall to continue to build the pressure so that by the time the elections are over and the lame duck session begins, if we continue to have very visible high public pressure, then we may be able to stop it from being introduced in the lame duck, and that would be a tremendous achievement. So thanks very much for the work that you're doing and for being on the call, and I hope you'll join us at the Flush the TPP phone calls every other Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and you can get information about that on flushthetpp.org. And if you go to our Tools for Education page, I see somebody asking about how to find the Tufts report. If you go to the Tools for Education page and scroll down, you'll see that I am listing the various economic analyses near the top, so you can find various reports there. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We're now going to introduce Wendy Getz, who has joined us on these calls for quite a long time. Because we're running late, I'm going to really sort of shorten Wendy's intro. As you can see, Wendy is an incredible activist. She's a concerned mom who in 2013 was part of the Climate Forward in Deep Sea Action. She's protested gas infrastructures, pipelines, protected rivers, water infrastructure rights, delivering public testimony at numerous hearings, and co-organized the regional March Against Monsanto. Wendy has some incredible photographs to show you of an action that they did in New Jersey. So, Wendy, are you ready to take us through these pictures?
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, global TPP resistors. I'm really honored to be sharing a big Main Street win with you all this evening. I started the TPP conversation with my town council in May of 2014, just during that 15-minute public comment session, and I kept up with this strategy through that November. I was met with resistance and comments such as, there's not even a text yet. So I finally put in my name to join the board or commission, and I was nominated onto the Environmental Commission. And during all of this time, I was out protesting and talking with different representatives. as well. I directly sent emails full of resources discussing the TPP, and I simultaneously really turned up the pressure on my district and congressional representatives. We were asking for a TPP-free zone resolution to oppose the fast track, and we really got no results. After June, when the fast track passed, we started some constructive conversations, and from there, after the text was released in November, the Environmental Commission finally backed me to bring forward a full but short presentation on the Trans-Pacific Partnership in December. And I tried to be very patient because December came and went, and I was dropped off the agenda again in January. But finally in February, I was brought forward, and again, in this interim, I was protesting, and some of those slides there, I'm sorry, the slides popped off my screen,
it popped off everybody's screen.
Oh, okay. And that was from the 50-hour vigil we conducted across from our congressional office in our town square. I did the full 50-hour vigil. I had a little bit of help with and lots of support from a group of about 30, 35 people. And we started on February 2nd to protest Obama signing it, don't sign it, and we continued on Wednesday and Thursday. Then you can see even in the middle, right above the TPP, that's Jerome Wagner. He was one of the folks that did the FERC hunger strike, and we had some amazing frontline activists come out from other fights as well to support us on that day. So I apologize, bear with me. Finally, a date came for us to get on the agenda, and it was with the Land Use Board, and the council members sat in my township. So I shared my short 20-minute presentation on March 7th. Well, I'm happy to report last Wednesday, a terrific resolution was passed. It was 4-0 with only the mayor abstaining. And I think, I'm not positive, I have to ask Nancy Price, we are the first resolution here in New Jersey. We have started a light brigade. We have a toilet that we roll out there occasionally on the sunny days and no rain or snow. We have all kinds of flags and posters. I also brought in a love letter right after Valentine's Day into the congressman's office there with his staff members. I joined the Flush the TPP team down in November and met with Congressman Garrett as well there in D.C. I also wanted to mention, of course, we're so excited that we finally attained the goal of getting the resolution. But going back to one of the other earlier questions that came up about what we can each do to make a difference, I think really getting out there everywhere, asking for what we would like to see, whether it's a resolution from your municipality or if it's for more non-GMO products and foods from your local grocer. That ask is where we start the conversation and the actions toward what we need to do to protect the generations. And to conclude, I wanted to also note some other resources that were absolutely helpful. The picture of the car there, that's me today. I went out to a garden show that brings in people from 5 different states, and I hook on posters to the back of my car, and we go out to the square on No TPP Tuesdays every Tuesday. I think we're coming up on our 19th week, and we will be continuing this through May 17th when that economic report is expected. So those resources that were fantastic, of course, Andrea, all of your downloads, your slides, and the recordings. The Alliance for Democracy website was was fantastic, and the ability to have a resolution to hand into your municipality is fantastic. I also took the Train the Trainer course and reviewed it quite a few times. That particular week, I had 3 presentations to 3 separate. I also presented the Tea Party, and I did a tutorial. So I presented 3 different presentations as well. And a little tip, I like using a video camera, but I just set it up and I turn it on right before I start, and that seems to just add a little bit of extra pressure, especially if you're in a municipality that doesn't usually have cameras or even microphones. And the letters to the editor. I recently had my first letter to the editor published, and that was very helpful in putting the pressure on. And it was really literally the week after the letter to the editor and my presentation that they passed the resolution. And I just want to say great work, everybody, and so looking forward. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you so much for all your activism. The next speaker is our own Harriet Haywood, another member of the call planning team. She's the call co-organizer. She is the Florida State leader for People Demanding Action, and she's going to talk about TPP free zones in Tampa.
Thanks, Andrea, and woohoo, Wendy, good for you. I also want to thank Ben, Lilliston, IATP, Ramon, Vera, Herrera with Grain, and Margaret Flowers for your great presentations. It was very informative. Okay, Tuesday, March 17th, the City of Tampa unanimously passed a resolution opposing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So happy us on St. Patrick's Day. And other local labor leaders met individually with council members to let them know that they oppose the TPP and to give them multiple reasons why the council should pass a resolution. We worked with Chris Radelich. He is the Move On Tampa council leader, and he helped coordinate a lot of moving parts over the last few years. And we worked along with organized labor, and we laid the groundwork for the resolution. We also got support from Nancy Price with the Alliance for Democracy. And I just want to tell everybody, you know, these things don't happen overnight. It was a protracted effort, and part of that campaign was to lobby Kathy Castor very hard over the last 2.5 to 3 years to get her to vote no, since that is the Tampa area is in her district. And Cheryl Schroeder, the central labor leader there, and other labor met with Castor shortly before the resolution to ask her to put pressure on the council. So that really helped also. I just want to say that the vote really is interesting, especially since Tampa's corporate mayor, Bob Buckhorn, has come out so strongly in favor of the TPP. So we really didn't think we had much of a chance for a while there, since Obama was flying Buckhorn around the country to tout the TPP. And as a matter of fact, he showed up in Atlanta during the negotiations last fall to tout the TPP. So this was quite a surprise, the way this came together. And I just want to also mention that in January, both Cheryl Schroeder and I were contacted by the Tampa Times in 2018. And the Times wanted to know if we thought his plans would be damaged by his support of the TPP. Cheryl Schroeder was on record as saying that the TPP vote will be a true litmus test when the state AFL-CIO screens candidates for governor. And I also was quoted as indicating it's a horrible thing to have on your resume, and it was in the Tampa Times, that it's done a lot of damage to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the South Florida member of Congress, as you all know, who chairs the DNC. She drew an anti-TPP primary progressive opponent, Tim Canova, after voting in favor of fast track last June. So, this was a really great success, and I want to thank Cheryl, the Central Labor Council, Chris Radulich, and everybody who made this possible. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Harriet. All right, now, to tell you about our upcoming call is Elizabeth Warren, the Communication and Outreach Director for People Demanding Action, not Senator Elizabeth Warren. So I saw some notes in the chat box. No, this is our Elizabeth Warren, not the Senator. Liz, take it away. Tell us about the call that you've arranged.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, good. And just a quick note to everybody in the chat. I have my own perspective on who I support for president, and I'm as passionate as all of you. Our goal here, because we have folks coming from both the right, the left, and also the center, I guess that's three places, we try our best to just try and avoid discussing the election. That way we stay focused on fighting TPP together. So nobody was being scolded, just reminded that we need to stay on our mission that we have joined hands on and, keep doing everything else that we're doing outside of the call. So just love you all and love the work you're doing. All right, so coming up, and we are so excited and thrilled and honored that we're going to have Terry O'Neill, president of NOW, the National Organization for Women, leading this. She'll be our next speaker. She will be the main guest speaker, and we're working right now on what she'll be talking about. She has some wonderful aspects of this issue that she's going to be addressing that we haven't talked about before. I can't tell you the whole story, but I'll give you just sort of a taste. ISDS, which we discussed today, and we've sort of brought it up on every call because it kind of spills over into affecting every issue, will be in play. We'll be talking about the historic impact of some of the other free trade agreements and what they have done for women, or to women, I should say, the world over. We'll be talking about state and federal regulations in the United States that have been hard-won protections and rights for women, how those are going to be affected. We'll be talking about human rights issues and women worldwide, and essentially everything having to do with the awful, awful things that will be happening to women and men and children as a result of this trade deal. But we're going to try and cover some new territory, not rehash things that we've talked about before. So please join that call. It's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be very thought-provoking, and we hope to have plenty of time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. All righty. We're now going to open up for an activist Q&A. So if you've got questions for our activists, go ahead and press star 6. Boy, the activists did a really great job. Star 6 if you've got a question. There we go. Hey, Mark, go ahead.
Hello, Mark Aslin, Escanaba, Michigan. My question has to do with the China bilateral investment treaty that is being quietly negotiated. How is, or possibly could that play into TPP and any other agreements that they have on the works that they're not telling us about?
Mark,
yes.
Let's see. I'm looking. Ramon is still here. So, Ramon, do you want to try that, or Margaret? I don't know that Margaret isn't here anymore. Margaret had to leave.
Well, I guess the other way I could put the question, Andrea, is can we use this China bilateral investment as a tool in our favor to show people that there's just so much of this going on, and they're trying to shove it through under everybody's through the dark of night, as they say.
Yeah, I can speak. If Ramon has an answer to that, I'd love to hear it. But otherwise, I can speak to that. Ramon, do you want to speak?
Yes, I want to answer. Well, for me, every free trade agreement is a tool for a kind of the tour of power or deviation of power, and that means that the human rights or collective rights or environment rights or whatever rights are suffering from economic interests. And I know that many people might say, well, let's go for China instead of whatever other big power, no? But I think they're all the same. That is the logic in it. It's the thing that's weird, no? And I think we must resist the way in which corporations are not caring about people. No? So I think it's really very important to step in front of all those processes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a thought. Very relevant to our call tonight. I mean, the thing that the China Bilateral Investment Treaty brings to mind for me is a Chinese corporation's acquisition of Smithfield Foods, and the massive hog producer that many people, and maybe Ramon can add to this actually, have argued through their offshoring production under NAFTA helped to, some people argue, incubate swine flu in Veracruz, Mexico. So now we are essentially, through the China Bilateral Investment Treaty, may be giving China the ability to, through this what is now a massive Chinese subsidiary, to use investor-state dispute settlement against any further attempt to push animal welfare or environmental or consumer safety regulations in the U.S. Through that might have an effect on their investment in Smithfield. So, I mean, that really brings to question, when we hear about TPP being a tool to rein in China, and this argument that TPP is about asserting, having the U.S. set the rules of the road, when we see that the U.S. is at the same time pushing for a treaty that would give Chinese corporations massive power to really attack U.S. public interest legislation, it really raises the question about how exactly this is asserting power against China when, in fact, clearly our government at the same time is pushing an agreement that is doing just the opposite. And, of course, if China ultimately is brought into TPP, which it has been talked about as the end game for TPP, it would have that same effect because those same investment rules are in TPP.
I agree totally with you, and I won't add anything because you put it very clearly.
All right. Next question, area code 250.
Thank you very much, Andrea. This is Alan Blaines speaking from Kelowna, British Columbia. I just wanted to follow up with some of the points that have been made by a number of the speakers with regards to how to get people aware of the dangers of some of these deregulated tribunals and how there's been public consultation on the feedback of these investment tribunals thus far. I sent a message to the Global TPP Facebook page about a report called the OBSI Public Consultations from February of 2016. It was from Canada. OBSI is the Ombudsman on Banking, Securities and Investment. And all 15 of the public consultations showed that basically rule of law is being totally destroyed across Canada by these deregulated industry-controlled tribunals. What I'm wanting to find out is anybody who's got any information on similar tribunal consultation documents, is there a way to get that kind of information compiled? Is there anything in the United States that is comparable to the OBSI? I contacted the Federal Trade Commission Seattle office about a week or so ago, and they don't have anything that relates to public consultation. Does anybody know of public consultation documents that show what kinds of decisions have been made by these tribunals?
This is Wendy. I can speak to the first part of the question.
Thanks, Wendy.
Hari, I've learned three things during my time as an activist. First, of course, is to know your audience or make a great judgment call. And the second one is be flexible and knowledgeable with language and linguistics. So as we're speaking publicly and with the public, we can target our audience and then target within ourselves our linguistics that will reach the audience. I've used a lot of investor rules or sovereignty with Republicans. And the third is just definitely research. And I'm sorry, I cannot speak to your second question. Hopefully someone else can. Thank you.
Okay.
Can anybody address the second part of Alan's question?
Alan, can you summarize the question about a sentence? That was a lot to take in.
Okay. Yes, I don't know if you had a chance, Adam, to open the link that I gave on the OBSI, public consultation input submissions for banking and investment, public tribunals that are controlled by the industry in Canada. I'm wanting to find out if there is a similar body in the United States that's collecting feedback from public parties as to what they have experienced by industry-controlled investment tribunals that would be comparable to the BSI.
I don't think there is. In terms of you're talking specifically about investments in the financial sector or investments in other sectors as well, or
primarily the financial sector. But I'm just thinking that the same sort of tribunal is being proposed for these trade agreements under the ISDS concept. And I think if we can see how these industry-controlled investment tribunals are working in the financial industry, then it could be useful to show what can be expected, after in the ISDS approach. So I hope we can, see how these industry-controlled, deregulated tribunals are working in the securities business, and how that could be useful as information.
Yeah, a person who might be able to give you a better answer to that. I'm just thinking, might be Kevin Gallagher, who has written on the issues around financial regulation and TPP. He's written quite a lot on the effect of these trade agreements in relation to the financial sector and actually quite a lot of other areas. So if you shoot me an email, I can certainly get you his contact information. I've been in touch with him in the past. He's connected with the global development environment. He's been connected with the Global Development Environment Institute at Tufts University and a few other institutions. I believe he's at Boston University. So you can email me at adam@tradejustice.net, and I'd be happy to pass that email on to you. He is at the Department of or you can just look him up. He's in the Department of International Relations at Boston University.
All right, now we've still got a couple of questions. Caveat, people who have questions only, no statements. This call has already gone on 2 hours. Caller at area code 216. Go ahead, ask your question. All right, next caller. Caller 518. Go ahead, ask your question.
Hi, yeah, this is Mary Alice Ramon in Plattsburgh, and I'm, one of the reasons we're having so much trouble with working on TPP and related issues is because our democracy is so broken. And I just want to point out that there's kind of a connection between working on the TPP and working on democracy, and there's a thing in D.C. in mid-May called Democracy Awakening, there's going to be a rally and march on Sunday, the 17th, and there are buses going from all over the place to that march and rally. So it's a good chance to connect the issues of democracy and TPP. And one of the things that these corporations, besides trade, are just, as someone said about national sovereignty being a trade barrier, democracy is anathema to them. And so fighting back for our democracy seems to me like part of the whole struggle. So I just wanted to let people know about that. And it's also a chance to talk to the people that will be on the march with you about TPP and point out to them the connections between TPP and democracy. Well, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Democracy Awakening is actually April 16th, 17th, and 18th. It starts with Democracy Spring, which begins April 2nd. It is a march from Philadelphia to Washington. Democracy Awakening, there will be a rally and a protest and civil disobedience. There will also be teach-ins, and then there will be a huge lobby day. Paul.
Hi. There's a lot of excess energy around the elections right now, and then maybe to another degree, GMO labeling and Flint, Michigan's water situation. And these are all issues that seem to get a lot of energy and support or outcry. Is it possible that we should, as activists, try to tap into that energy, or should we just be apart from that?
I can say some things on that. I'm sure Wendy can as well. I've said a bunch, so anyone else want to comment?
I can speak to that briefly. I think that it's a very good idea to put those connections forward, and I think one very important way of doing it is to go to actions that those other movements are having, meetings of theirs, teach-ins of theirs, and go as a guest, and somebody who's going genuinely to their event, and bring your own materials with you and, just talk, develop a relationship with them and talk about what you're doing and how it connects with what they're doing, and then, stay in touch and invite them to join your effort. It's all about personal relationships and developing those connections.
Absolutely, I agree. This is Wendy. For example, this morning I went on a hike. 7:30 this morning, and went up. They're doing a big deforestation project in my hometown where I grew up, and I went out and hiked with all the resistors and brought forward the message, okay, this is what's happening now. And if the TPP passes in 1 year, this is what things would look like then. And I kind of bring that to each issue. Every organization has something on their table, and I try and share with them what the issue would look like if the TPP has passed as well. Lots of persistence, people.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the reason as I was mentioning before, I mean, Earth Day is coming up, so these are some great movements and groups to reach out to say, can we co-sponsor an event together to look at how TPP will address your issue of concern. One of the advantages, I don't know if you have, I guess an advantage is a strange way to put it, of working on this issue is that TPP is so terrible across so many different sectors that it gives us a lot of people to reach out to. It also gives us a lot of ways to talk to different elected officials based on what we think might appeal to them. If you're, on the one hand, if you're talking to let's say you're meeting with Senator Cory Booker in New Jersey, who is a vegan and is very concerned about some of the kind of issues that we talked about tonight with regards to animal agriculture and its effects on the environment and cruelty to animals, etc. He is someone who some of this information that we've talked about tonight and how the industrial meat industry will benefit from TPP might be very appealing to. On the other hand, if you know that your member of Congress is heavily supported by the cattle industry, that may not be the argument that you want to use. You might, on the other hand, be willing to talk to that person about how many cattle ranchers are concerned about the Keystone XL pipeline and how that pipeline could potentially threaten their livelihood, and the NAFTA KXL case gives an indication of how our ability to regulate and prevent such policies could be at risk if you're talking to Republicans, as Wendy was saying before. Those sovereignty arguments that she was talking about, or the jobs arguments that I was talking about before, may be more compelling than any of these environmentally based arguments. So yeah, we do need to talk to people where they're at. People are going to have different perspectives. I mean, even just looking at the chat box in this call, there are people arguing for whether we should support veganism or whether manure is great fuel, or great fertilizer. So we amongst ourselves are going to have different points of view. But we can, whether you're on that issue, whether your perspective is that we should support we should support local animal agriculture and small farms, or whether we should feel animal agriculture altogether is something we need to get rid of. TPP is bad news in both cases. TPP will mean more animal agriculture and more cheap animal products flooding the globe, and the facilitation of a global shift towards more animal-centered diets, and it'll also mean more of that agriculture coming from industrial livestock production. So different messages are going to speak to different people in different ways. But at the end of the day, the thing that's really clear for all of us is that we have a common interest in stopping these terrible trade deals.
Last question. Stephen, is that you?
No, this is Dean. I had a quick question on from Democracy Watch News about Democracy Spring. I know they're looking at changing that date slightly, so keep an eye out for that. They haven't announced it yet. They're being real slow on that. But I'm really curious about the degree of involvement that any of your partners might have in that event. Check.
Democracy Spring as opposed to Awakening. I am on the steering committee of Awakening. I am not that involved with Democracy Spring.
Well, they are going to merge together in Washington and participate together, I know.
Right, yes, they are.
Also, one quick heads up that does relate to your earlier topic. There was a march in Baja California that was rather brutally attacked by police of agricultural workers. They're going to meet with some people from the American side at the border, and I haven't got a report today on that, but yesterday they were attacked by police. And Human Rights Oaxaca is well aware. Philippe is keeping tabs on that.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah.
All right. Great. This has been an excellent webinar and call. It's been very, very long. I know everybody is going to want to go and get on with their lives, so I'm going to thank you all very much for spending so much time with us this evening, and I hope you learned